If you check the Steam hardware survey in 2025, you'll notice something surprising: a GPU from 2019. The GTX 1650 is still one of the most used graphics cards in the world, which makes no sense, right? It's old, it's weak, it has limited VRAM, and yet millions of people still rely on it every single day. So, what's going on here? Why does this budget GPU refuse to die even in 2025? Well, today we're breaking down the real reasons why the GTX 1650 is still everywhere and why so many gamers haven't moved on. To understand why the GTX 1650 is still so common today, we need to look at how it flooded the market in the first place. When Nvidia launched it back in 2019, it wasn't meant to be a powerful GPU. It was meant to be the default ultra-budget option: low power, cheap to produce, and easy to install in almost any PC. And that strategy worked. Major brands like Dell, HP, Acer, and Lenovo started putting the 1650 into millions of pre-built systems for homes, offices, and schools. Laptop manufacturers adopted it too, turning it into one of the most widespread mobile GPUs of its generation. Because it was produced in huge quantities, prices stayed low, and suddenly the GTX 1650 became the standard GPU for budget buyers all over the world. But the biggest reason the GTX 1650 survived this long comes down to one simple thing: power. The 1650 is a 75-watt GPU. That means it can run on almost any power supply, even the tiny 250 or 300-watt units you find in old office PCs. Most models don't even need a PCIe power connector. You just plug it into the motherboard and it works. And for millions of people, that's a huge deal, because upgrading the GPU is cheap. But upgrading the power supply, that can cost more than the graphics card itself, especially in countries where PC parts are expensive. So the 1650 became the perfect drop-in upgrade for older systems. No new power supply, no cables, no compatibility issues. This single advantage kept it relevant for years, but power is only part of the story. Here's the thing most people forget: not everyone is trying to play heavy AAA games. Most gamers today just want smooth performance in esports titles, and the GTX 1650 still delivers exactly that. At 1080p low settings, it can push over 100 FPS in Valorant, 200 to 300 FPS in Fortnite performance mode, around 120 FPS in CS2, and more than enough for games like Apex Legends and League of Legends. For millions of players, this is all they need. They're not chasing ultra settings. They're not hunting for ray tracing. They just want consistent, competitive performance. And if your daily games are running perfectly fine, there's zero pressure to upgrade, especially when every new GPU seems to get more expensive each year. That's why esports alone kept the GTX 1650 alive for so long. Of course, once you move beyond esports, the story changes. The GTX 1650 was never designed for modern AAA gaming. And in 2025, that's more clear than ever. No ray tracing, only 4 GB of VRAM, and aging architecture. It hits a wall very quickly. But here's the surprising part: it can still run more games than people expect. With smart settings and upscaling, titles like Cyberpunk 2077 can reach playable frame rates at 1080p low using FSR. Even demanding games like Black Myth, Wukong can run, not natively, but at very low resolutions with upscaling applied. Newer shooters like Marvel Rivals also perform decently on low settings, which keeps the card relevant for casual AAA players. But it's not all good news. Games like Stalker 2 struggle heavily. Big cinematic titles like the new Indiana Jones or some recent survival horror releases are simply too demanding or no longer supported. So the message is simple: the GTX 1650 won't run everything, but it still surprises people more often than it should. So, should you buy a GTX 1650 in 2025? If you only play esports titles or you're running an older PC with a weak power supply, the 1650 is still a practical, budget-friendly option, especially when you can find it for under $100. But if you have even a bit more to spend, GPUs like the RX 580, GTX 1660, or RX 6600 offer far better performance for not much more money. The 1650 is fine for basic gaming and older systems, but for modern AAA titles or higher settings, it simply won't keep up. It's a card that survives, not one that excels.